Hey guys, what is up? Super K-Man Rocks here, and we are here for my NACL round number 3 overview and analysis video in the summer split playoffs. We have so much on the line here today for every single team that's performing. Of course, there's going to be multiple eliminations, 3 to be exact, in the 4 series that we're going to cover here today, but we're also going to get our first qualification series for the promotion tournament at the end of the year because winners finals will be covered in today's video. Only 2 series remain, 3 at the end of this video, 3 teams, I should say, at the end of this video vying for championship supremacy. How is it going to go down? Well, I'm excited to cover it in today's video. If you're excited, let me know down in the comment section below. What did you expect from these series, and did they live up to your expectations, or were you perhaps surprised by the outcomes? I'm sure that there were definitely some big conversational topics in terms of how some of these series went, and even the specifics of how some of these series went, so I'm excited to hear your thoughts and opinions down below. But let's go ahead and get into it. If you are new here, what we're going to do is go series by series, talking about the advantages and disadvantages that each team was able to generate. I'll be giving a player of the series and a dud of the series for each series that we cover, and at the end of the video, we will be looking at the updated bracket with only the semifinals and finals remaining to talk about. So a lot on the line for the 3 teams that will survive and the other 3 that will not survive going into the rest of 2025. So let's go ahead and get into it. We're going to start off on the lower part of the bracket. We're going to go in the same order that these series happened in real life. So this is technically lower bracket round 2. You know, I'm calling this video round 3 because we have lower bracket round 2, lower bracket round 3, and upper bracket round 4. I think round 3 just makes the most sense. It's the 3rd weekend of action here, so I figured that was the most apt thing to call it. But kicking off our lower bracket matchups here is a matchup between the number 8 seeded Blue Otter and the number 3 seeded DarkZero. And Blue Otter is going to pick up the massive 3-2 win. It's going to go all 5 games. They're going to go the distance, but they are going to pick up the win. This is a pretty huge upset, and Blue Otter at this point has proven beyond a shadow of a doubt that they are a team that you have to watch out for here in the playoffs, that they have leveled up going into these best of 5s. I think this team has kind of shown that their own individual champion pools are kind of uniquely suited for, you know, fearless best of 5s. The fact that they have 2 solo laners that have very specific playstyles and don't often share a lot of champion pool similarities with a lot of the other mid laners at this, or mid and top laners at this level, really create a lot of options for them in games 4 and 5 and even game 3, you know, that other teams might not have with things like the Mel and the Morgana in game number 5. But it really was in full effect here. And DarkZero, you know, honestly, I would love to sit here and say that I'm stunned that this team ended up getting knocked out here, but I'm not entirely surprised. I think that there was some writing on the wall that this team was a bit overrated coming out of the regular season. Still, this is a massive loss for a team and an organization in DarkZero and Dragonsteel and Maryville, whatever you want to kind of claim them to be, that has been pretty much unanimously and perennially successful over the past 2 years or so. For them to be out before even like 4th place, like in 5th, 6th place here in the lower bracket, is definitely a disappointing finish. And, you know, with so many of their players now in the LTA, it's just kind of proven that they weren't able to keep up once they sold a majority of their roster. And people are going to question whether or not that was the right or the wrong decision. But let's go ahead and get into this series just in general. Player of the series is obviously Quacker. I don't think it could possibly go to anyone else, and that's no disrespect to the rest of the team. I think Kryra was actually pretty phenomenal here today, and I don't think he's getting nearly enough credit for just how good he was throughout all of their wins. But Quacker was the main character for Blue Water. I think you can point to him in basically every game except game number 2, ironically enough, being the better top laner. Game 2 is the only one where it's like, okay, has a ton of resources on the Jax, and he's actually playing relatively well. Even the other wins, for the most part, for DZ were, you know, Quacker games. Maybe not so much the Olaf one, but certainly you can look at game 1 on the Rumble with him being really strong, and he was undoubtedly the main character in games 3 and 5 here with the Renekton and the Yorick. And that's just really exciting for him as a player. Somebody we've been talking about being so mechanically talented for so long here in the NACL. I remember hyping him up, I mean, way back multiple years ago in 2023 when he really got his first tier 2 opportunity as somebody that was really kind of carrying some bad teams from the top side. He didn't really have a ton of talent around him, and finally on Blue Water, it felt like the rest of the team started stepping up and he could start to really push that forward. But it's kind of been mired by a lot of the negative games that have ended up being a lot more flip-floppy than maybe you would want. We know the best version version of Quacker can still be an elite top laner at the tier 2 level, I think there's a strong argument that his best games are like the third or second best top laner at, the tier 2 level right now. That's how good Quacker can be, and honestly, that's how good he was in this series. It's all about limiting the problems, and for Blue Water, he stepped up when they needed him to the most in this series. He was much better than Kay on the other side, who's been awesome over the course of this regular season, and it's just cool to see. I know Quacker was kind of pseudo-considering retirement at the end of last split and has talked about it a lot. He's not somebody who, necessarily sees himself sitting around in tier 2 for a very long time like some other players. He wants to either, promote himself up to tier 1 or get out of here. Like, he's not going to waste his time making no money playing competitive, and I get it. Like, it makes a lot of sense. It's hard to survive in this ecosystem, but he might be dragging his team to a pretty gigantic result if he continues to play this well, because he was just so massive. His side laning in particular, I want to stress, this wasn't just him taking over in 5v5s. This was genuinely him breaking the game open on side lanes, like on Yorick, on Renekton, just creating, mismatched numbers. He obliterated the Gwen in game 3. Kay really had no chance in game number 5 once Yorick basically got this gigantic gold influx in one fight, and all of a sudden the game was over because he just played sides better than DZ were able to handle. Blue Otter's macro in general was definitely better down the stretch of this series, but I think Quacker really exhibited that to its fullest. But that's where I also want to give a lot of credit to Kryra in the jungle as well, because I do think Kryra's not getting nearly enough credit for just how well he played. I get that a lot of the conversation is around Quacker and around the Yorick and the Renekton, and I think that a lot of that is deserved, but Kryra was massive in this series, going up against his, former team, DarkZero, who replaced him with Kisno on the other side because they wanted to try and promote up to the LTA. Well, Kryra just completely outplayed Kisno to eliminate DarkZero from the playoffs. It's a massive showcase for a player that I've believed in for a very long time, the Ivern and the Skarner, but I think what gets lost is the Wukong game in game number 2, where he was essential towards that team's success. Samikin and Array needed setup in order to be able to do what they needed to do on the Annie and the Jhin, and I think the Wukong ended up offering that in that game to win. I think Kryra was massive, was the better jungler here today, and I already talked about it, but the macro at the end of this series, which we can give Rovex some credit for as well. Everybody on the team contributes to side lane play and macro and just general map awareness and, when to go in, when to not go in. Like, it's a whole team effort, but you got to give a lot of credit to the macro roles in particular, like jungle and like support, for being able to express that. Rovex was excellent in terms of setting things up in this series. Array's KDA might not be the most outstanding, but look at the champions he played in their wins. He played Jhin, he played Senna. Like, these were the kinds of things that he could be on, where he could just outpace and outplay Sajed on the other side of this. Samikin pulling out freaking Mel and Morgana in the mid lane in this series. The Mel, less surprising. We've seen it kind of grow back into popularity over the course of this year, but Morgana mid in 2025, genuinely insane. If he can play it, I can play it in solo queue. That's what I'm, taking in terms of how this goes, because it looked pretty good. Like, you need a damage carry, but luckily Quacker was strong on that Yorick, and it ended up not being a problem. Blue Otter just continue to showcase the fire and the fight that they have within them. This team will not die. They will not go down without a fight, and it's clear that at this point you have to consider them actual threats. They've taken down Supernova, they've taken down DarkZero in terms of series. This is not the same team from the regular season. They are benefiting immensely from best of fives, and they might continue to later on in this video, but for DarkZero on the other side, this is a very disappointing finish. I don't think anybody really anticipated this team going out in 5th, 6th place. I think of the top 3, they were the most likely to do so, just in terms of what they looked like in the regular season, but they were still a part of that top 3, and even then, like, I thought they were better than Conviction heading into the playoffs, and that turned out to absolutely not be the case. DarkZero just could never find their footing, and I think a lot of it just ends up with, like, okay, well, was it worth it? Was it worth selling off Zamudo and Yuji for what you got for them to get Kay and Kisno in and to no longer be a team that could compete to promote up into the LTA? With Zamudo, with Yuji, are you a team that's promoting? Maybe. I mean, likely, in terms of how that roster was constructed, so certainly at least a conversation in that regard. You also turned down a buyout for Toasty because you wanted to try and stay competitive, at least as far as we know. This isn't confirmed or anything, but, DSG wanted Toasty and DarkZero wanted to keep him because they wanted to try and promote. So you ended up kind of getting the worst of both worlds. You couldn't promote and you didn't get the most amount of money you possibly could from the buyouts. I still don't think you can look at this year as a massive disappointment for DarkZero and for Maryville and everything. They still ended up sweeping CLOL, which is massive for them, and this was a team that was mega competitive throughout all of the spring split split. They just couldn't carry that over into summer. And there were even some good performances in this series. I think Toasty ended up playing really well in their wins in particular. That Yone game in Game 4 was massive from him and really did keep the team alive. I don't think everything was bad from Sajed and Zyko, even if I do think Array and Robex were equally as good on the other side, but it was the top side of the map that ended up being DarkZero's undoing, and that was their change. That was the thing that ended up, being the difference for them going into summer. I don't think Kisno was as good as Kryra. I think especially in terms of the decision-making and the engage on the Jarvan in game number 5, that's where things ended up going quite south for DarkZero, and K for me is going to get dud of the series. I know it feels kind of harsh, but honestly, K only had one really good game of this series, and they didn't even win the game. It was game 2 on the Jax. The Galio game was fine. I think the Mbessa game was fine, but he was bad on the Gwen in game 3, and he was not very good on the Cassante in game 5 either. I think Quacker was definitely better on the other side, and they relied a lot on K to kind of fill into Zamudo's shoes on this team, and quite frankly, he just wasn't able to do that in this series. I'm not going to panic and freak out about DarkZero and talk about how, this org made some terrible decisions. Like, it's still going to be Maryville at the end of the day going into 2026. Whatever they end up doing decision-wise is going to be fine. They still have so much talent on this team, even if some of them leave to go to Tier 1, because I think it's pretty reasonable to expect players like Toasty and Sajed and Zyko to get looks at the Tier 1 level, at least for now. But unfortunately for DarkZero, they will not be going with this organization. Blue Otter move on to round number 3. I'm super excited to talk about Blue Otter series later, because that's how we're going to end this video. Is they're going to take on the winner of the series we're talking about next to try and keep themselves alive. But at least for now, the Romp Stomp is still coming in full effect, and the miracle run for the last ranked seed in the playoffs is on the table. But then moving on to our second of the lower bracket series, and this one is mired in controversy, in questions, and just so many thoughts, so many opinions, so many feelings. It was the number 6 seeded Dorado Gaming taking on the number 1 seeded Supernova, and Supernova is going to take this series 3-2. So much to talk about here when it comes to these two teams. First off, I have to get the elephant out of the room. Game 5 was weird. Like, there is a lot of weird stuff going on. I'm not trying to make any accusations. There have been accusations thrown around on Twitter and whatever. Certainly, I'm not making any. I think this was actually a pretty standard way to end the game. I'm not going to pretend like this felt any strange, at least from that fight alone. The pause, however, very unfortunate. Whatever the reason, like, you want to blame Supernova, you want to blame the tournament organizers and the referees for not being able to come to a conclusion fast enough, whatever you want to say. It's just really unfortunate, because Game 5 should have been this gigantic culmination of this split for these two teams, and it just wasn't. Like, all of the air got sucked out of the building because of that pause. And again, I'm not blaming Supernova. If you think something is wrong, then go for it, but identify what the problem is and then figure it out, right? Like, it's your season on the line. I would always rather pause than not. It just is what it is. Like, the fact that it was not resolved in any sort of, clean timing is certainly frustrating, but Dorado really the ones that suffer from it. They are absolutely destroying game number 5. Maybe not destroying, but they're definitely winning game number 5. They pick up a gigantic fight around Dragon, and then they, win Baron, and all of a sudden they're escaping, and it's a choke point, and they lose the game. And it is what it is. It's pretty frustrating to watch in terms of just the momentum, but there's a lot to talk about. It was 2-2 for a reason going into that series or going into that final game. So we can talk about that. Player of the series is obviously Scary Jerry. I think he was absolutely massive here today. And if there's one player that you can't criticize for basically anything throughout this series, I think it's Scary Jerry. Sushi also played fantastic, continuing to show that he is a big game performer, that he is here to step up when it matters the most. But it was Jerry who really, kind of put Supernova on his back here today. I think specifically you're looking at like the Kaisa game, and I think a lot of the ults with Misfortune, a lot of the bullet times, the Ezreal game was massive from him. I just think he was so good here today, kind of showcasing why he's been such a dominant threat in Tier 2 for, basically every single year after his first year in Tier 2. He's just looked so good in the format, and I think he's a big reason why Supernova have looked so dominant coming back down from Tier 1. I think that there is credit to go elsewhere as well. I mean, Hoarder had some big moments on the Olaf in game number 5, ends up just running down Mixture, killing him, and then there's no front line on Dorado to be able to survive the rest of that engage, and things just kind of go south really quickly. Kind of scary that it can be that quick. I think it's obviously a bit frustrating, but credit to Hoarder. I think he did a great job to get there. I think Breezy had a great series in terms of setup. I think mostly on the Braum and the Rakan in games 2 and 3, where I thought thought he was fantastic. You know, ABO had moments, I think, throughout this series where he was okay. He had moments where he got absolutely trounced by Shochi and by the rest of the team. Dardoch, I think, had moments where he was okay, but for the most part, kind of got outplayed by Kaido for a majority of this series. Like, mid-jungle wasn't exactly the strength of Supernova, but Scary Jerry was the best player on the Rift here today, and so he's going to be the one getting his team over the hump. And then for Dorado, this just feels terrible. Like, genuinely, like, what do I even say? It's just got to feel so frustrating for Dorado for your split to end this way. Because obviously they had high expectations going into this. They were a team that did not view themselves as like a mid-table team. They wanted to be able to compete with the upper echelon. And at this point, I think it's undeniable that they can. They beat DarkZero in the playoffs. They went to Game 5 and had a big lead against Supernova. This is a team that deserves to be considered one of the best in the NACL. They just couldn't quite get there today. Dud of the series, and I want to make this clear. I don't think I made this clear enough in the first series. It's something I've said in other regions, and so sometimes I can get a little bit lackadaisical, but I know a lot of people who watch the NACL maybe don't watch a lot of the other regions. When you go to 5 games in a best of 5, good luck finding a dud of the series. Like, you know what I mean? Like, somebody's going to have played bad in a game, but they're going to have played really well in another game. And unfortunately, Shochi for me is going to land it here, mostly for game 3 on the Annie. I think that's really the one where I'm looking at and just being like, if that game was a little bit better, maybe things change. I think he got caught out a couple of times on the Malzahar, but overall, like, Shochi was awesome in game 1 on the Corki. I think he was really important in game 4 on the Ziggs as well. Like, to pretend like he was bad across this series, I think is just not reality, but that's kind of the truth of the best of 5, right? Like, who else do I give this to on the team? Do you give it to Mixture because he died first in the final fight and that really mattered? Well, he was really, really good on the Bard in game number 1, and he was really good on the Rel in game number 4. Sushi was arguably the best player on the Rift up until game 5 for, you know, when Scary Jerry kind of overtook him. Kaido was the better jungler here. I think Ariana, for parts of the series, was the better top laner. There just isn't a good candidate for dud of the series. In fact, I think the most reasonable candidate for dud of the series outside of Shochi is probably Dardoch or a Blaze Olive. I think it's pretty reasonable to give it to one of those two as well. I just ended up landing on Shochi because of the Annie game, but don't think this changes my opinion on Shochi. I still believe he's an upper tier mid laner, and if anything, all that's been proven over the course of this year is that the core of this team that you built, you know, Ariana, Kaido, Shochi, Sushi, Mixture, like, they are good enough that you give them a little bit more time, they're going to be competing at the tier 2 level. Shochi, we know, can be an upper tier threat. This guy has gone on multiple playoff runs, has been immensely successful, and honestly has performed very well individually, but to see the best that we've ever seen out of players like Kaido, who have gotten opportunities before, to get players like Ariana and Mixture into tier 2, for Sushi to continue to showcase that he is such a big time performer, such a big game, big moment type of player. You get him into the playoffs and he's playing the best league he's ever played. Like, Dorado has something building here, and I get that it's frustrating for this to be the end of 2025 for them because of everything surrounding game number 5. It's got to feel very demoralizing, and, you know, I'm right there with you. I felt pretty demoralized, not because I was cheering for Dorado. You know, I try to stay unbiased on this channel, but because it's just a sucky way for a game 5 to end in a big series like this. But if anything, Dorado has outperformed expectations by an absolutely mammoth margin. This team has proven that they deserve to be considered, you know, big threats going into the NACL next year, whether they're together or on separate teams. And I think everybody on this team's stock was raised for playing throughout this split. And for Supernova, they get the chance to prove that this was not a fluke later on in the video going up against Blue Otter. That is a massive rematch of a round number 1 matchup. But, you know, Supernova has not looked like the almost undefeated team from the regular season. They have looked very mortal across this this playoff run so far. We know that teams look very different in best of 5s than they do in best of 1s. Big surprise there, but I think even more so for a team like Supernova, it is very clear that it is affecting them. Can they hold on to that number 1 seed? Can they live up to that billing? And can they get their revenge on Blue Water? The only way to know is to find out later on. We're going to take a little bit of a detour, though, going to the top side of the bracket, but at least for now, Supernova going to be moving on. That is indeed going to bring us to our winners finals, our upper bracket round number 4 matchup. The winner of this will instantly qualify not only for the finals here in the NACL to try to become champions, but also for the promotion tournament to get up to the LTA and Tier 1 next year as one of the 2 teams going. So massive stakes for these 2 teams. It's number 2 seeded Luminosity Gaming taking on number 4 seeded Conviction, and Luminosity is going to pick up the 3-1 series win. Our our first series of the video that doesn't go all 5 games. Much easier to talk about a series that isn't quite as back and forth in favor of one or the other team. Really, in this one, it was Luminosity from start to finish. Like, they're just really good, man. Conviction actually had a couple of moments. I think you can look at that game number 2, but even then they had to come back from behind, playing Sejuani Azir Senna, one of the least expected drafts you could see out of a Conviction-esque type of team, but it just ended up being really rough for them in the early game throughout basically the entire series. Insanity goes Kog'Maw into Ziggs, into Hui, into Veigar. He is not dealing with any of those super meta mid laners or anything like that. You can get them out of the way. No Talia for me here today. I'm playing AP Kog'Maw and Veigar in this series. It's pretty funny to see that. The draft in general in game number 4 is quite greedy from Luminosity. The Kiana jungle that's really been brought to popularity over in the LPL. The Taric that I think has found kind of a form in this meta, at least over the course of the past couple of weeks. There are so many things that kind of went crazy, but Luminosity really was just better, and that's to no fault of Conviction. We're going to talk about them. You know, they had some ups and downs in this series generally, but this is the best team in the NACL that they're playing up against, and it's not particularly close. So let's go ahead and talk about it. Tomio for me is player of the series, but really, at the end of the day, take your pick, man. Zeyzal had 74 assists across these 4 games. If you wanted to give it to Zeyzal, I think that that's almost entirely understandable. I do believe it was between those two for me in terms of player of the series. It should go to one of the, I guess, more macro roles here with the jungle or support, the ones that were affecting the whole map, but really everybody on the team ended up playing well. I'm certainly not trying to disparage anybody's game plan. Fake God was so much better than TF Blade in this series, especially in that game number 4 when he completely outplays that dive on the top side that throws away Conviction's only early game lead of the entire series. Insanity, as we already talked about, popped off on things like AP Kog'Maw mid and Veigar. You know, Tactical was super consistent, only died 4 times across these 4 games. He averaged 1 death per game, and they lost a game in this series. Like, it's just ridiculous how good everybody on Luminosity was. But really, you know, whether you want to give it to Tomio for the way he opened up the map on things like Vi and Pantheon, and then obviously the Kiana game in game 4, or whether you want to give it to Zeyzal for being so involved in basically everything that happened throughout the entirety of the series and really making life as easy as possible for his 2 main carries in Insanity and Tactical, I think is up to you. I think both of them are justified and worthy of getting player of the series. Again, I'm giving it to Tomio because I think his plays were a little bit more flashy, but Zeyzal was just as effective, and I think generally both of them should get all the praise in the world. As we've talked about throughout all of this year, they've really been the 2 that have impressed me the most throughout all of summer. And that's really cool to see. I think that there were moments where they did not look, you know, in lockstep in the LTA or the LCS last year on Shopify Rebellion. It never really felt like it clicked for Tomio and Zeyzal, and it does feel like it's clicking now. I think both of them are in better form than they've been in a while. That includes the DSG time, at least from my perspective. So I am excited to see that these 2 have gotten back on the same page and are really starting to take over again. Having some fantastic, you know, solo laners and carries like Tactical are going to help a lot in that regard. Once again, it's another example of Tactical taking more of a backseat role in terms of the resources that are given to him, even though he is playing very resource-heavy champions like Zeri and Kai'Sa in the back half of this series, but not necessarily needing to be the main character in order to win games. That was a problem with Tactical early on in his career. It is not a problem anymore. Insanity, you know, he has an eclectic champion pool. We kind of knew him for the AD, like mid laners, or at least like the marksman mid. I think that was really a meta that really resonated with me just in general. I remember things like Graves mid, the Scion mid, you know. Insanity's had a pretty eclectic champion pool for a while, and to get to see that on a pretty big stage here against Conviction, I think is really cool. Fake God, like I said, just completely outplayed TF Blade. At times he outplayed Perry as well in the jungle in terms of the plays that were attempted to be made on the top side for Conviction. It just felt like everybody on Luminosity was better, and Conviction's a really dangerous team. They have handily been able to take down really good competition like Citadel and like Blue Otter. We already know how good Blue Otter is. We talked about them in this video. We're not done talking about them, and yet, you know, Conviction really had no trouble with them the last time they played a best of 3. It's just exciting where they are at, but Luminosity is on a different level. Right now, this is a team that is favored to promote, in my opinion. I think they're better than Disguised. I think they look like a team that could be middle of the pack in the LTA in their current construction, and that is really cool to see. But for Conviction, some places you can point to, I think this team is going to take the aggressive route. I think they are often going to put themselves in positions where they need to make plays in order to win games. And when you draft the way that they did in this series, I think it does take away a little bit of the spark that they normally have. Things like Azir Senna with the Sejuani and even the Jax in game number 2. Yes, that was their win, but you have no agency in the early game. Things like Orianna and Corki in game number 1. Things like Victor in game number 3. It really just doesn't feel like any of these drafts have a lot of ways to set the pace. I think game 4 is is the best example of a draft that could theoretically have that, and quite frankly, they did in the early game. They did have tempo, they did have pressure, they just couldn't hold on to it. They go for a dive on the top side on a fake god, and he completely outplays it, and all of a sudden, the entire lead they had generated is gone. The game is basically over from that point. I am going to give Perry dead of the series, but like I said, basically everybody in their individual roles got outplayed here today. I consider TF Blade for dead of the series. I just think that he was a little bit less impactful in a negative way in games 1 and 3, where I think the Poppy and the Wukong just ended up being really big negatives. I considered Stunt for obviously leading the team in deaths throughout this series, but that's kind of his job, and I think generally he did what he was supposed to do in this series. I considered Viper, who is going to have that really aggressive mentality in terms of his positioning, and there were games where it looked not playable. The Corki in game number 1 was especially terrible from him, and I do not want to see him on that champion again. But for Conviction, it really just comes down to, can they start to play their own style and start to feel comfortable in their own game plan? Because I really did feel like Luminosity just took them out of their comfort zone in this series. They put them on the back foot and they really had no response. I really respect what Conviction does in terms of how they're able to push their advantages and create advantages, quite frankly, for themselves. I think Evolved has been great at shoving and roaming, creating a lead for himself, even, minor one in the mid lane and then moving around. And Viper and, TF Blade have obviously been carries. Perry's been a huge engage threat. Stunt has been awesome, especially pulling out Enchanters. There's a lot to like about Conviction, but there is a tier between everybody and Luminosity right now, who are just on fire. This team is doing everything they need to do in order to solidify themselves as the threat in the NACL. Not only are they favorites to take this tournament and go into the promotion tournament as the number 1 seed, I think they're favorites to promote as well. But then moving on to the series that I've been so excited to talk about in this video, it is the qualification for the semifinals to kind of eliminate the team in 4th place and to get somebody into the lower bracket finals. Both of these teams have come from very different places, but meet with one goal in mind. It was the number 8 seeded Blue Otter taking on the number 1 seeded Supernova. And Blue Otter is going to do it. They're going to pull off the upset, and at this point, it's no longer an upset. There is no longer a thing to talk about in terms of, can Blue Otter compete with the upper echelon? Is the playoff run, is their win over Supernova at the start of the split real? They beat DarkZero, all of this stuff. They just slammed Supernova 3-0. They didn't drop a single game, the only 3-0 of the video here, and Blue Otter is moving on to the lower bracket finals. They've guaranteed themselves a top 3 finish. And they are 1 series away, 1 best of 5 away from qualifying for the promotion tournament. It is insane that this team that was honestly super close to missing playoffs just in general, not just, missing out on being a good team in playoffs, but missing the entire tournament. They get this forfeit win over Conviction that maybe they wouldn't have gotten otherwise. And because of that, they're in and they are making the most of it. For Supernova, this has to feel so deflating. Like, there's really no other way to talk about this. This was a team that was promotion or bust in terms of the roster that was constructed. They bring in so many veterans, players like Dardock and a Blaze Olive. They bring Scary Jerry down from tier 1 after he's replaced on Disguised. Breezy, who's been in tier 2 for a long time, but finally has an opportunity to promote. And one of the top young rising top laners in the league in a Hoarder, and it does not work out. Despite being the number 1 seed, they can't find their way into the top 3. It's certainly disappointing from them, but how can you be anything other than excited for Blue Otter in this instance? Samikin, for me, has got to be player of the series. I think it's up for debate. I think Array was excellent here, and I think Array deserves a lot of credit for just how well he ended up playing, but how can I not give it to Samikin? His Mel was massive in game number 2, and that's really the game that solidified player of the series for me. And he gets a solo kill on Seraphine into Victor in game number 3. That's impossible. Mid lane Seraphine is already something that I'm question mark pinging alongside the Mordekaiser top lane, but to get a solo kill on Seraphine in the mid lane and to pick up another a little bit later, absolutely massive. Like, Samikin was so huge throughout this series, and I genuinely do believe that his eclectic champion pool, the things that kind of threw Supernova off of their mark, that's what made the difference in a series like this. And you just have to be so excited for a player like Samikin, who has never abandoned his roots. He's never abandoned the things he's good at. This guy will always have Zoe permabanned against him. He's going to pull out Lux every once in a while. The Mel, the Seraphine, like a lot of the special picks to Samikin, they're going to stick around and he's going to make the most of it. And now he's dragging, I shouldn't say dragging. It's not like the team's an anchor or anything. He's carrying his team to top 3. Absolutely incredible stuff. Happy for him to do it again on this team, a Blue Otter team that's no stranger to to, I guess, going on miracle playoff runs, but it's just a little bit different this time. I already talked about it. Array was excellent in this series. Scary Jerry has been so massive for Supernova. One of the big reasons why this team has felt so consistent over the course of this split has been because Scary Jerry has looked like that tier 1 version of him, you know, the top 80 carry in the league from last year. Array outplayed him here today. There is nothing else to say. Array and Rovex were better than Scary Jerry and Breezy, and I guess, you know, we can talk about it again. This happened in round number 1, but Array going up against his support from the previous split in Breezy on CCG. Also a really fun storyline there. So for Array to play so well, for Rovex to be such an initiator, Kryra, I think, was massive today, and he has been such a spark plug for Blue Water. I have been going to bat for Kryra over and over again on this channel for so long. I've been very vocal about how, you know, on CCG, he really helped to elevate them in that small amount of time. And then you get to watch him in the offseason really get, you know, really showcase how talented he can be when he was on the CCG secondary team. I'm blanking on the name right now, but he ends up doing really well there in the offseason in those tournaments. And he comes over here at the start of the year to DarkZero because of the whole Polestar thing. And he has a chance to really break through that team. And he ends up making finals with that team in the playoffs, and everything looks so good. And then they want to go in a different direction. So he doesn't have a team for a majority of this split. He's the 3rd jungler this split on Blue Water, and all he does is elevate. All he does is come in as the super sub and make whatever team he's playing for better. At this point, you cannot deny that Kryra is one of the rising star prospects in North America. There is no longer a conversation about that. And Quacker for the 2nd series in a row with some flashy plays, the Mordekaiser in game 3, even the Shen in game number 2. You know, we can talk about Samikin pulling out some crazy off-meta picks. Well, Quacker wasn't too far behind in that front as well. Blue Water just looked incredible in this series, and I'm so happy for this team. As for Supernova on the other side, this has to feel like a gut punch. Like everything that you had worked for in the regular season was, you know, gone in thin air. But honestly, like they did not play like the team they were in the regular season, even in their wins. Like, you know, it's pretty arguable that they should have lost to Dorado in the in the round number 2 matchup. I think looking at that series and the way things went, like game 5 wasn't going their way. I'm not saying there was any funny business. I'm not trying to make any behind the scenes calls. Everybody seems to be saying something about that on Twitter. I'm certainly not going to be joining that discussion in any way, shape, or form. But Supernova had something to prove going into this series that they did not prove against Dorado, and they didn't prove it here. Dardoch had a terrible playoffs. Like, there's nothing else to say. He was bad against Blue Water the first time they played. He was bad against Dorado, and he was bad here again against Blue Water. He is their veteran leader. He was their MVP candidate for me coming out of the regular season. He wasn't good enough in their playoff run. He's done of the series. I think you could realistically give this to a Blaze Olive in the mid lane, who ended up playing really terrible. I think he had a couple of really great games in the regular season, but he couldn't carry that form into playoffs either. Scary Jerry has been really good in the playoffs specifically. This is his weakest series by far. Array ended up really outplaying him. He couldn't get anything going in the mid game and really just ended up kind of getting outscaled in a lot of these games. And Breezy and Hoarder also weren't there. Supernova just were not good enough. They were close in game 1. There were moments where that was close. They were close in game 3 where it felt like it could go any direction. But every time it felt like Supernova had an in-way or an inroad into this series, Blue Water snuffed it out as quickly as they could. And honestly, for an org like Supernova that's been around in North America for such a long time and has never really been able to get over that hump of being one of the best teams in Tier 2, this has to feel demoralizing. This is the closest they've ever come to being champions, and yet here they are sitting in 4th place. But for Blue Water on the other side, this is massive. This is one of the great, you know, Tier 2 playoff runs. We always get some sort of upset, some sort of crazy run from a team in the playoffs. This is more than a lot of the other ones. Even the previous Blue Water, you know, mega playoff run. I think this is truly just exceptional stuff from a team that everybody counted out, me included, that everybody was saying, oh, should they even be in the playoffs in the first place? You know, they got that free win over Conviction. Would they be in the playoffs without that? Well, they have silenced every hater. They have silenced every doubter. And they are currently on their way to pushing for what is a monumental achievement, which is even just getting into the promotion tournament. And at that point, anything can really happen. They are 1 series away from being top 2. And with the momentum they have right now, it's certainly not impossible. All right, but that is going to do it for my NACL round number 3 overview and analysis video. The only thing remaining is the semis and the finals. Both of these 2 series will be covered in one video that's upcoming after both of them are done. I know I try and get the finals to be their own video, but with the promotion tournament really being the crowning achievement, it feels kind of, you know, appropriate to put these 2 together, and especially with all of the playoffs kind of converging at the same time, just, you know, video-wise, it was really the only option we have. But there is some really exciting stuff to talk about. The semifinals here, Conviction taking on Blue Otter. You know, the last time these two teams played, the only time these two teams have played over the course of this split, Conviction was pretty easily able to take the series 2-0. Will they be able to do that again? You know, 3-0 maybe? I don't think 3-0. I think Blue Otter's going to put up a fight, but they are still underdogs. I have to go for Conviction here. They were better the last time these two teams played. There's no real reason to believe that everything has changed. I think Conviction is a team that is good enough to get themselves into the promotion tournament, and that alone is already exciting because of the roster that they have and just kind of the narrative surrounding them. No matter who wins this series, it's going to be really, really fun, but unfortunately, I think both of them will fall to Luminosity. They just kind of feel unbeatable right now in terms of other tier 2 teams, but let me know if you agree or disagree with that takedown in the comment section below. Very curious to know what you kind of land on for these final 3 teams and what you thought of the series we got here today, but that's going to do it. I do hope you guys enjoyed. If you did, leave a like. It really does mean a lot to me. It lets me know you guys are enjoying the content, and it does help get this video out to a lot more people, which I'm always very appreciative of. If you're new here, hit the subscribe button. Of course, like I said, we'll be posting a video on the semifinals and finals in the upcoming weekend, but we cover all 4 of the major regions on this channel as well, so LTA North, LEC, LCK, and LPL every single week, and playoffs and worlds and all of that stuff. We're going to be covering the promotion tournament. Everything you need to know about League of Legends is covered on this channel, so hit subscribe and hit that bell. But as a reminder, still casting for LPL English. I am going to be on for a playoff series this upcoming weekend, a round 1 matchup. I will be on for a round 2 matchup as well, and, you know, we'll see what happens later on. So if you're interested in watching me cast live, or perhaps just want to tune into the LPL, the links to that are going to be in the description, the YouTube and the Twitch. Subscribe, follow, whichever platform is easier for you. But with all that being said, I hope you all are having a great day. I hope you continue to have a great day, and I will see you all later.